everybody. This is Cheri at djsundry.blogspot.com, and tonight we are going to talk about mixing pattern papers. Now, this whole month, the focus in our 101 club is going to be mixing pattern paper. And the reason why I have waited until late, even though we've been doing this, is simply that we have been doing it based on the instructions that we're giving to you. And I wanted you to become very familiar with doing that so that it wouldn't seem so foreign when we actually start playing and trying to do it on our own. So, what do I mean by mixing pattern paper? Well, if you're like me, when you were a kid, you were taught you don't mix stripes and plaids, you don't mix plaids and florals, you don't mix stripes and florals. None of those things go together. And that was true for that time. But then other things came up and we started mixing and matching, and that was really hard for me in the scrapbooking world because that's not really how I think or how I operate. And so it was definitely something that I had to actually learn, and I'm still not great at it, but there are some tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way that I hope will help you when you're designing your own, and not necessarily given a guide like what comes in with our workshops and says, okay, put this one together and this one. Well, now hopefully you will start recognizing what they're doing so that you can begin to make those decisions on your own. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the fact that often when we're mixing pattern paper, I want you to pay really close attention to how you purchase your pattern paper. If you walk into Joann's or Michael's or Hobby Lobby or another scrapbooking store, it can be very overwhelming with all of the shelves of single paper that's out there. If you opened up one of my drawers that has all the single paper, it would be the same way. But if you purchase them in packs or in books, often most of the papers were designed to some degree to coordinate together. Now, it may be in pattern types, it may be in color tones, but somehow they were designed to go together. Now, that doesn't mean that you are necessarily going to use every single piece of paper out of that will absolutely go together with every other single piece of paper in that same kit, but it does start with some sort of a place to go from. Now, I have some different brands in front of me besides Close to My Heart so that I can kind of demonstrate what I mean. So I'm going to set some of this stuff aside because it's a little distracting, and let's look at this first one. This is a die cuts with a view pack, and this is a small paper. It's called the Matte Stack, and this is quite old. I don't know, I've probably had it 4 or 5 years at least, but as you go through it, you can see the different colors, and what you can notice is they're very thematic, meaning they have a similar feel with them. They also have a similar color tone with them. Now, they're not all the same colors, and there are some I personally wouldn't put together, but there are others that you might not think to put together that would go together because they do have all the same. Ooh, camera didn't like that one. They're kind of in the same color tone family, so that you can see how they do that. Now, this is from a different company. This is from the K & Company, and this is a very patriotic pack. And you see the same thing, red, white, and blue. And if you've been out looking at things, you know that red, white, and blue does not always match other red, white, and blue, meaning sometimes they may be more bright, bold primary colors, sometimes they may lean a little bit more washed out, and other times they may be more country colors. Sometimes they may take on a jewel tone. So if I pulled the red from this pack and the red from a primary color pack, and they probably wouldn't match, but the tones within here are going to match. As you can see, these have the more muted, kind of jewel tony like colors in them, so that they are designed to coordinate together. Now, I would not be likely personally to use like this one with this one, although you could possibly make it work with the right work to it. So that's how those go. So often when you purchase them, that's the first thing to know, that they will somewhat coordinate. Now, when you purchase from Close to My Heart, any of our kits, like what you purchase in the seasonal expressions, like this is Dreamin' Big, I think. Yes, dreaming big. All of the colors and papers inside of here match. They're designed to go together. That doesn't mean you're going to want to put every single paper on top of every single one, but you do have some places to play with. So to demonstrate what I'm talking about tonight, I'm going to start with what is our constant campaign, the Live Beautifully campaign for the month of May. And hopefully we will be able to identify kind of the idea of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to set those zip strips aside, and we're going to look at the papers in here. So what you notice is these all have basically the same tone when it comes to the softer pastels. Now on this side, see how they still coordinate? You've got the deeper colors, but you've still got the bursts of these little colors coming through, and so therefore they coordinate. Now by contrast, you have this very stark black and white print, and the back side of that is black with white polka dots. And you might think, well, those really aren't the same, but remember, we can often treat black and white as a neutral. So where I would personally be very careful about putting those two together, I will even show you a trick how you can do that if you so desired, but where I would be careful, because it might just be too busy for the eye, there are some times that you could even make that work, believe it or not. This is more of the green, and the pinks on the other side. Another black and white print. And so at first glance you might be saying, you know, those really don't go together. Well, they really do, because you can treat these as your neutral colors. And then as we go in deeper, we've got this gold and white that you could kind of treat kind of as a neutral. And then on this one you have this, I don't even know what color that is, just a dark pink on there, and then more black and white. So they do kind of go, but you might not think of it, but they were designed to go with each other. Now, in a previous video that you should have seen, or is at least linked in our page, I recently did a layout using these kits. And I actually used a base of a paper that's no longer here because I used both pieces as my card base, but I actually, believe it or not, used little pops of this, little pops of this, little pops of this, as well as, believe it or not, little pops of this. And at the end of the video, I'll show you those pictures again to just kind of refresh your mind on how those went. But what you'll notice here is that this paper really isn't truly a solid color. However, because of the graduated and because it's muted, it can kind of trick the eye a little bit into making you think that you're seeing a solid color. And so that's one of the tips when you're working with it. Do you have a pattern that kind of is muted enough or soft enough that it can trick the eye into thinking that you have a solid? Because if you do, that might be something that you can layer another paper on top of. So if I look at, let's see, I think there was one here still. Perhaps, maybe not. Well, this one you could maybe get away with it, but that's pretty busy. Let me find here a little bit better. This one's a little bit more muted, and so you could, with the right papers, you could kind of trick your eye into possibly seeing this as a solid when you put your pattern paper over the top. This is one of the ones that I did with this layout, and you may remember it now that you've seen this one. And again, this has a diagonal stripe on it, but it's so subtle that you can trick your eye into seeing it as a solid, and therefore these busy prints look just fine on top of it. This is the other side. This is that graduated piece, and it does kind of give that soothing, trick your eye into thinking it's a solid. But then we put these little pops of bold color in there. Now, a lot of times when you are mixing pattern paper like this, another, it's not a hard and fast rule, but another thought is to maybe choose a dominant color and maybe a couple of complementary colors, and don't go with too many color options. You know, maybe 3 is your best. Now, I broke that rule with this particular layout because this strip in and of itself has your black and 3 colors besides your solid white. So basically we've got about 5 colors going on in here, but because it's just subtle little pops, I think it still works. If you had too many of 5, now if I had a bigger piece of this is obviously going to have more than 5 colors in it. So I'm going to want to be really careful about, if I had a big piece of that, say maybe I wanted this square to be that, then I would want to be really careful about the other colors that I put in here, because it would make it too busy. I maybe would want to pull out 2, maximum 3 colors out of the tones in here, and just kind of use them as a highlight to that busy color. So the first tip is choose a pack of paper and kind of stick with it as you're learning before going to Hobby Lobby and just choosing a bunch of one piece of paper because you really like it, and another piece because you really like it, and then another piece because you're going to get those home and you may not have any solids to match, and you might find yourself with a bunch of paper sitting in there. The second tip is be careful with your more subtle papers, because sometimes tone on tone can trick the eye into thinking it's kind of solid enough that you can make it work. So that's another tip. Another tip when you're layering in pattern paper, and even when you're not, even if you're not putting pattern on top of pattern, one of the rules I learned years ago when I was scrapbooking, and I've noticed we don't follow that rule so much anymore, but every once in a while I like to, when I put my photo down, before putting a busy photo on top of a busy piece of paper, let me pull a photo and show you, try to demonstrate what I'm going to show you. Now this one works okay, I guess, because there is, it's pretty light here and I'm going on a darker piece of paper. So it works okay. But if I were to take a solid piece, like this is just an envelope, but I'm just using it to demonstrate, and I would never use white because you lose your background in the white. But if I were to take a solid piece and put it between the two, and maybe just set it at like 1/8 to 1/4 inch around, it would make that photo pop a little bit more. So in this particular instance, if I had a piece of, let me see, I've got all sorts of stuff around here. If I had a piece of black and I just framed it just like that, in fact, let's just cut it and I will demonstrate exactly what I'm talking to you about. And I think you'll see what a little pop this makes. Now I'm going to go pretty narrow here. It's about, and I do a lot of eyeballing like that. And I don't want to cut it, I don't want it to permanently adhere there. But let's cut that. So let's look at this. There is my photo on there. It's cute, and actually it would work, and amazingly enough all those colors go together. But if I take it and put it on the black and line it up and put it on top, see how it makes it pop just that much more? You probably wouldn't even recognize the difference, but when you see them you can see what the difference is. I have, let's see, I think I have a repeat of that same picture, a similar one. And then when you put them side by side, do you see the difference? Which one pops more? In my opinion, this one pops that much more off the page. They're very similar photos. This one has more of a background to it, but this one to me just gives that extra pop off the page. So that's why I will often matte my photos, and sometimes even when I'm doing the kits I'll matte the photos, because it does give it just that extra pop between it. Now another thing when you are mixing pattern paper to think about is you are really probably not going to find that it's pleasing to your eye if you put two pieces like this together. That is just mind-boggling, staggeringly busy. So you want to do something, if you really like those together, and actually they're kind of fun together, they kind of go together, but if you want to do something to still use those, you just need to break it up. So how do you break it up? Well, there are several ways to break it up, and I'll show you an example. Maybe if you took a zip strip, now not this one, because see how busy that is? Actually, that kind of works. Kind of like that. But you take a piece of cardstock that is kind of neutral and put it between them, so that if I took a piece of, let's see, if I had one here. If I took a piece of this, that's too busy for you to see what I'm trying to show you. Let's do it this way. If you put a piece of that, which I would never use that color, I would probably pull one of the reds or pinks out. But if you put that strip all the way around, see how it breaks it up? And so it kind of deceives the eye into thinking, you know what, those look really cool together, but it doesn't make it seem too busy. Now typically, I have to say, I would not put that busy of prints together. Be really careful. If you're going to put something that bold together, do it because you really love it and you think it's going to work. But start looking at this. If I start throwing photos on that, especially if I start throwing photos like that on your background, it is just too much. It's like a very busy room with lots of stuff on the walls. It's just too much. So think about this. I love both of these prints, but do I really want to put my photos on top of it? Probably not. So how can I use those prints to accent my photos and not detract from them? And that's when one of the things would be is to use smaller blocks. Use smaller blocks of colors to break them up. Use little pieces of this because you love it, little pieces of either one. They'll go together like they did in my other one, but use little pieces of it so that it's not so busy that it is actually detracting. The other thing is mix sizes of patterns. And what I mean by that, this is very busy. This is very busy, obviously. Oops, camera has to adjust. But it doesn't seem nearly as busy as this does because they're scaled much differently. It almost tricks your eye into seeing this more as a solid or a semi-solid. So if it were me and I wanted these two pieces together, I would go ahead and I maybe would break it apart with something. And you might, let's see, could you get away with your black and white stripe here? Let's see what it looks like. You could. It's still a little bit busy for my personal taste, but you could. But instead, break it up with a solid or just use little pops of this throughout. Use it in a grid or something so that you can put it. The other thing is if you wanted to, cut a little square of it, mount it on something like this, and then it pulls it off of it, and it gives that break to your eye. So if I had a square of this, like this, and then I popped it up on the pink, it all matches color-wise. All of these pinks are coordinated together, but it breaks it so that your eye doesn't go, whoa, look at all that pattern. But it gives it that hint of beauty. So mix and match, but use different sizes of patterns because too much, imagine these together. Wow, that is busy. But if you use little pops of it, you can possibly make it work. But if you were to replace, let's see, let's replace that black and white with this black and white. Isn't that more pleasing to the eye a little bit? I think it is, because you've got 3 different scales of sizes here instead of 2 big ones and then one semi-big one. See how we've got 3 different sizes going on. So those are some basic hints. Now what I want to do is, I'm not doing a project with this video on purpose yet. We're going to give it a week or so because I want you to play and I want you to get in, and you can use the paper that you used or that you purchased for this month. Or you can go back to some of the old kits that we've already worked on together. And I want you to not look at the instructions that came with the kit, not look at things that you've done before. You can maybe grab a sketch, grab a piece of paper, go to your sketchbook and say, okay, how can I make these work together using the principles that we talked about and make something really fun, really imaginative, very much my own. But how can I make all of these busy patterns work together? Or are there some patterns that really shouldn't work together? And then in a week or so, I will come back with another video and showing you how I've done the same thing, and we can compare. But I want to see your pictures. I want to see what you're doing, because you know what? It's a really fun to copy what somebody else is doing, because that gets our creative juices flowing. But when we really start putting those to the test and making our own things, then it really feels like it's a part of you, and that then just broadens your creativity to go so many different ways. So take the challenge, and I want to see what you're doing. Thanks so much for stopping by today. Don't be afraid to fail, and remember, take some time to enjoy the little things. Have a great day. Bye.